At a gallop. Bibi and Tina rode off with the wind whistling in their ears. Only when the girls reached the road to Falkenstein did they slow to a trot until arriving at the marketplace. They left their horses in front of the inn and stormed into the lobby. A middle-aged lady in an elegant dress stood at the reception desk, her attention shifting between a French fashion magazine lying on the counter and the tiny brush, soaked in red, with which she painted her nails. The lady sighed somewhat enviously at the latest glossy images of Parisian Vogue. Falkenstein could simply not compete. Her daydreaming quickly faded at the sight of two young girls in riding clothes, running straight toward her. Red-faced and overheated by the wild ride, they didn't look like typical Falkenstein Inn guests. "Did a young woman arrive here tonight?" Tina asked, breathlessly. "A young woman? What young woman?" The lady shook her head nervously, then blew over the fingernails of her left hand. "Her name is Marie de Remoulade," said Bibi. "No, there's no guest by the name of Marie de Remoulade," the lady replied. Bibi and Tina took a look at each other. Could they have been mistaken? Then Bibi had an idea. Perhaps an older lady stayed here? Hedwig von Falkenstein? Now the woman nodded. "Ah, yes, of course, a very impressive lady. She seemed so amazingly young for her age. I immediately asked her how she does it, but she said true beauty comes from within." The lady at the reception desk appeared rather disappointed as she said this, but Bibi and Tina breathed a sigh of relief. They had come to the right conclusion. Marie was here. "This is our, aunt," said Tina. "We would like to visit her." "You're too late," replied the lady. "She has already left." "Left?" repeated Bibi. "Where to, and when?" cried Tina in horror. "She took a taxi to the station about 15 minutes ago," the woman said. "Thank you very much," cried the two girls and rushed to the exit. "Will we still make it to the train on time?" Bibi thought aloud as she swung into Sabrina's saddle. "We must hurry." Tina climbed up too. "Giddy up, Amadeus." The two girls steered the horses into the street and galloped off. They were determined to catch Marie. If they didn't reach the station in time, Marie was long gone with the stolen necklace. Traffic in town, however, proved to be a challenge for the horses. One motorist even pulled up next to them, rolled his window down, and barked out a barrage of insults, ranting like crazy as he leaned on the horn. Sabrina reared up nervously. "Take it easy, my sweet," Bibi calmed the mare. After they had maneuvered through a busy crossing, Tina had an idea. "Come on, Bibi, I know a shortcut, this way." Tina made off for a side road, above which hung a sign that read, "No entry." When Bibi pointed it out to her friend, she just said, "At least there's not so much traffic here." They turned off toward the right with their horses. The road was deserted, and the girls pushed Sabrina and Amadeus into a sprint. But after the first bend, they had to rein them in. The road was cordoned off with yellow and black striped plastic caution tape. One man broke open the asphalt with a jackhammer, while another used a small excavator to load the rubble into a container on the side of the road. Both workers wore ear protection against the deafening noise. Bibi and Tina patted their horses as they danced restlessly and snorted, alarmed by the commotion. "What are we going to do now?" Tina shouted against the clamor. "We have to keep going," Bibi yelled back. "How?" The road was blocked across the entire width. The two workers had their backs turned toward the girls and still had not seen them. All at once, the noise died down. They were taking their morning break. "We have to fly," Bibi said quickly to Tina. "What?" Tina thought she had heard wrong. It was too complicated for Bibi to give an explanation. Besides, they had no time for it, so she simply said, "Just do the same as I do, Tina." "Okay," her friend nodded. Bibi tightened her thighs around Sabrina and set her off into a gallop over the pavement, hooves clacking with Tina right beside her. Still wearing their earmuffs, the workers had not even noticed them go racing by. Only seconds away from the yellow-striped barrier, Bibi chanted, "Eeny meeny, shot like an arrow, Pegasus wings and fluttering sparrow, stronger than Icarus into the sun, upwards we fly in—" Bibi and Tina had reached the yellow tape. 3, Bibi counted. She and Tina put their heels into the stirrups and bent forward. 2, Bibi shouted. Sabrina and Amadeus jumped. 1, whiz whiz. Bibi ended the spell as the two horses were already floating through the air. A loud pling-pling resounded as a cloud of glittering stars encircled both riders and horses, giving the wondrous impression of them being carried across the construction site. Only now did the two men look up to see this dreamlike spectacle. The horses came down again on the other side of the barrier with the girls securely in their saddles. Without a moment's break, they continued around the next bend at a gallop, leaving two awestruck workmen open-mouthed and speechless. The road soon merged directly onto the service route alongside Falkenstein Station. Only seconds away on the other side of the street was the station building. Tina's shortcut had really made a difference. The girls could see that the train from Redwell was just arriving as they raced across the street and onto the empty sidewalk. They rode past the station building and straight onto the platform. The train only stopped for a few minutes in Falkenstein, but with a little luck, they could still manage to catch Marie. Tom and Doug were sitting in their usual spot on the bench in front of the station, just like they did every other morning. They had finished reading their newspapers and decided to go for a walk in the park to feed the ducks. The regional train from Redwell had just pulled into the station, and above its screeching steel wheels, the two old friends were oblivious to the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Even Bibi and Tina didn't notice the two seniors at first, seeing as how the bench was tucked behind a wall. "Faster, Amadeus!" cried Tina, who was half a horse length from Bibi. But suddenly, Tom and Doug rounded the corner onto the sidewalk. Bibi and Tina pulled back the reins, throwing both horses into a whinnying, unsteady halt as the two terrified men stumbled backwards. Doug lost his footing and fell sideways over the curb. Bibi and Tina jumped off immediately. "Is everything all right?" Bibi asked as she helped Doug to his feet. Yes, he replied, brushing the dust off his pants. "But slow down with those horses," he laughed good-naturedly. Bibi and Tina apologized as the conductor's sharp whistle sounded. Then the train doors slammed shut. "Hurry, Tina!" cried Bibi. They jumped back in the saddle and hauled around the station building onto the platform. Doug and Tom looked after them, shaking their heads. "Man, kids are always in such a hurry," Doug uttered. "Hey, old man, you are no different," muttered Tom with a smile. The two friends continued to reminisce as they headed off towards the duck pond. The train had already begun rolling slowly out of the station. "Quick, after it!" cried Tina, determined not to give up. They pushed Sabrina and Amadeus with everything they had, hollering and galloping alongside the tracks. But the train had already reached its traveling speed and began to overtake the two pursuers. "We won't make it, Bibi!" cried Tina. "You have to do something!" Bibi, seeing herself that they really had no chance, dropped Sabrina's reins and raised her hands. "Eeny, meeny, good prevail, stop the wheels atop the rail, whiz, whiz!" Only a few witch stars sprayed out of Bibi's fingers, and the pling-pling sound muffled weakly under the train's roar as it continued down the track. "What's wrong?" cried Tina. Bibi shrugged her shoulders. "I gave it everything," she sighed. Stopping a moving train was no small thing for a witch, especially one who had just flown two horses over a construction site. "We were so close," Tina said desperately. They looked on, following the last car of the train until it got smaller and smaller, disappearing through a row of trees on the horizon. Tina turned her horse around and Bibi followed. They trotted slowly back to the station. Even the horses left their heads hanging. "We have no choice but to return to the castle with the bad news," Tina said gloomily. The girls knew what that meant. The Count would call the police, and the whole birthday party would be cancelled. "Poor Aunt Hedwig," thought Bibi as she released a deep sigh. Then she noticed an elderly lady in a long blue dress, standing on the platform and wearing a large, elegant hat. Only the old backpack she wore did not fit her appearance. Bibi steadied Sabrina. "Look who's there," she said to Tina. She pointed to the figure, who stood motionless on the platform as if awaiting the girl's arrival. Witches' noses cannot be fooled. "Well, hello there," Tina said, barely disguising her anger. "Good to see you, Marie, but why aren't you on the train with your stolen necklace?" Marie, who had fixed her gaze to the ground the whole time Bibi and Tina had ridden towards her, finally raised her head. "I don't know," she said quietly, taking in Bibi and Tina with big, sorrowful eyes. "When I wanted to get in, I couldn't." "You couldn't?" Bibi asked cautiously. "No, I couldn't." The corner of Marie's mouth twitched. Bibi and Tina were almost startled, if not confused, to see her eyes well up with tears. Bibi's impulse was to comfort her, but of course that was not possible. Marie had stolen the necklace. She was a thief. She didn't deserve pity. Marie's tears now poured through a mix of mascara and makeup, leaving dark traces where they trickled down her cheeks. She gave them free rein, only once wiping the back of her hand over her face, smearing the makeup even more across her runny, sniffling nose. She looked terrible. Bibi and Tina said nothing. They just stood there, holding their horses by the reins and waiting for Marie to calm down. Finally, the tears dried up. Marie put down her backpack, pulled out a handkerchief, and blew her nose hard. Bibi suggested sitting on the bench in front of the station, and they tied their horses to a post. Suddenly, the words gushed out of Marie. "I'm so terribly sorry about everything," she said. "I had such fun cooking with you. Besides, everyone in the castle was so nice to me. The Count and Butler Ethelbert and Aunt Hedwig. Yes, especially Aunt Hedwig," she remembered. "She even found my lost locket. And to thank her for it, you stole her necklace," Tina interrupted, unmoved. Marie swallowed. "I know it was wrong," she said, "but I only truly realized it when I was waiting here for the train." "A little late," Tina replied snappily. Marie was silent. She sat there with her head bowed and shoulders drooping. "Why did you do it anyway?" Bibi finally asked. "Yes, why?" Marie's fingers began to play with the medallion she wore around her neck again. It seemed as if she herself was only now thinking about this question. She then opened the medallion. Look. Inside the silver pendant was a tiny photograph. It showed a young woman who looked very much like Marie. "That's my mother when she was my age," she said. "I told you she was an actress." Bibi and Tina feared Marie would start crying again, as sad as she now looked. Instead, she faltered through a story of how her mother had died in a tragic car accident 5 years ago. After that, everything changed completely for Marie, because she and her father were suddenly alone. "When I wasn't at school, I stood with him in the kitchen," Marie explained. "He taught me everything he knew about cooking." "So your father really is a master chef?" Bibi asked. "Of course," Marie nodded. "Just the thing about my great-grandfather, who cooked for the French king. I made up to impress the Count." "Well, you managed that." Tina tried to hide the grin that snuck onto her face. Marie continued to tell how working together in the kitchen had helped her and her father to get over the death of Marie's mother. "With time we got better," Marie explained. "But still, I missed my mother deeply." Eventually, she started watching all her mother's movies. "I especially liked The Master Thief of London," said Marie. "It's so adventurous and exciting and funny, I watched it over and over again." "And just because of that film is the reason you stole the necklace?" Tina could hardly believe it. "No, it's not like that." Marie shook her head. After she had finished school, she went on to say that she had no idea what to do after that. "I just didn't know if I really wanted to be a cook," she explained. "I didn't know anything else. I told my father that I wanted to travel around a bit and think about my future." "And he allowed you to do that?" Bibi wondered. "My father would never let me do that." "I'm a little older than you," said Marie, and for the first time there was a hint of a smile on her face again. "Of course, my father was also terribly worried," she continued, "but he understood. Well, then I went to Redwell. I wanted to visit the castle, and because the door happened to be open, I walked right in. I thought maybe there would be a guided tour or something, but nobody was there. And there were valuable cups and vases everywhere, and expensive oil paintings hanging on the walls. All of a sudden, I had this totally crazy idea, just to try it out, to be a master thief." "Because the door was open?" Tina asked incredulously. "Yes," Marie nodded. "Once I was inside the castle, it was like a game. I walked through the rooms, looking all around at all these amazing artifacts. But when the prince suddenly appeared, I was so frightened that I ran out immediately. When I arrived in Falkenstein the next day by train, I read about my alleged burglary in the newspaper. It said I was a thief, even though I hadn't done anything at all. Then I came across an advertisement that another castle was looking for a cook, and I knew it must be a twist of fate." "A twist of fate?" Bibi asked. "Why?" "Because it was so strange." Marie told him how the ad had suddenly appeared in the paper. It was like magic. Before that, there was an article about an animal shelter that was closing due to a lack of money. And then suddenly this ad appeared. Then everything became clear to me. With whatever money I could steal as a master thief, I would help the shelter and provide justice, just like Mary McMuffin. "That was not a twist of fate, Marie," said Bibi. "I'm the one who put that ad in the newspaper." "That was you?" cried Marie, slapping her palm against her forehead. "I never thought of that before. But for Marie to look at the newspaper at the very moment you placed the ad, that's a crazy coincidence," Tina said thoughtfully. "Well, whether it's a coincidence or fate, who knows," said Marie. "Anyway, the Count hired me, and finally Aunt Hedwig arrived with this precious necklace, and there I couldn't help it." "I see." Tina nodded slowly while Bibi chewed on her lower lip. Of course, it hadn't been right what Marie had done, but if you knew the exact circumstances, well, somehow the girls could almost understand Marie. "And what do you want to do now?" Bibi asked. "Of course I'll give the necklace back to Aunt Hedwig," said Marie resolutely. "But perhaps you should—" Tina pointed to Marie's face. "I mean, it would be a good idea to wipe off all that makeup first. You look awful." Marie was still wearing Aunt Hedwig's clothes and the gray wig. "I'll be right back," she shouted, and disappeared with her backpack towards the station. Bibi and Tina waited on the bench. "I hope she doesn't run away again," said Tina. "I don't think so," replied Bibi. "I don't think so either," said Tina. After a pause, she said, "By the way, Bibi, I'm sorry." "Sorry for what?" "Well, that I didn't take your suspicions seriously right away." She looked affectionately at Bibi. "We all fell for Marie, except you." "It was my witch's nose," Bibi smiled with a wink. "Besides, you were right. Marie is really nice, although she is a bit crazy." Marie came back wearing the same clothes she had arrived in when she had first stepped onto the platform in Falkenstein. Her face was shining. "Come," she cried, "let's ride back to the castle." Suddenly, Bibi thought of something. "What time is it?" Marie looked at her watch. 11:30. Why? "Oh no!" Bibi jumped up from the bench. She and Tina quickly untied their horses. "What's wrong?" Marie asked worriedly. "If we're not back by 12 o'clock sharp, the Count will tell Aunt Hedwig and inform Sergeant Quincy." "Sergeant Quincy?" Marie's face went pale. Will I go to jail then?" "Well, you did steal an unbelievably valuable necklace after all, and that policeman didn't look as if he came around to make friends," said Tina, as she swung herself on Amadeus's back. "Come." She reached out her hand to Marie and pulled her onto the saddle in front of her. They left the town at a safe trot, but as soon as the horses reached the country road, the girls leaned in and set off at a gallop towards Falkenstein Castle, enthroned above the landscape on a distant hilltop. All theater. Count Falkenstein Falkenstein had busied himself in the rose garden. He knelt between the flowers with shears, pinching off dead branches and removing a withered blossom here and there. He had been working here for over an hour, and although the rose's beauty usually calmed him, the same question kept running through the Count's mind. Would Bibi and Tina manage to return the necklace? The Count rose with a sigh. He lumbered towards the castle gate and looked out over the surrounding countryside. No matter how hard he strained his eyes, there were no riders to be seen approaching the castle. He pulled out his golden pocket watch. 5 minutes to 12. In 5 minutes, he would have to inform his aunt, who was still unsuspectingly engaged in a game of chess with Alexander. He had a few, rather pathetic explanations ready for the disappearance of Bibi, Tina, and Marie, but to his surprise, Aunt Hedwig had not even asked. She had only threatened him again with a waving finger and said, Falco, admit it. It has something to do with the birthday surprise, right?" Yes, it does," the Count had replied sheepishly. Indeed, Aunt Hedwig was about to receive a surprise, but not a pleasant one. This birthday would be a disaster, all because he had let himself be duped by Marie. The Count had foolishly assumed that someone who could cook so well had to be forthright. "How very wrong one can be," he muttered bitterly. The Count glanced at his watch, 12 on the dot. He looked out beyond the gate one last time to the horizon. Not a rider in sight. Bibi and Tina had not made it. Marie had escaped. The necklace was lost. Well then, the Count tensed his shoulders. He had no choice but to bear the catastrophe with composure. Aunt Hedwig would probably leave immediately when she learned what had happened, let alone never speak to him again. His relatives would turn away from him forever. After all, he had practically given away his family's most valuable heirloom. Moreover, he would become the laughingstock of all Falkenstein once it became known that he, himself, had revealed its hiding place to the thief. Alexander and Aunt Hedwig were sitting at one of the small tables that stood in the hall as the Count entered the castle. They were so engrossed in their chess game that they didn't even notice him. The Count cleared his throat briefly. Alexander lifted his head and looked at his father expectantly. "Aunt Hedwig," said the Count, attempting to sound dignified through his otherwise cracking voice. "I have to discuss something with you, a matter of utmost importance." "Just a moment, Falco darling." Aunt Hedwig's gaze remained fixed on the chessboard. She moved her white queen one square to the right. "Check," she said. Alex stared at the board in amazement. After a moment's study, He moved his king to the side to keep him safe. But Aunt Hedwig had foreseen this. Without hesitation, she took her rook and moved it to the right as well, to the line on which the Black King also stood. Checkmate! Alex gasped at the board once more in utter disbelief. He had just lost for the third time in a row, even though he'd been spending every free moment practicing. Aunt Hedwig played so masterfully that she would have driven any chess master to despair. She finally turned from her nephew to the Count. Falco, you wanted to discuss something with me? Something serious? The Count came straight to the point. That's right, Aunt Hedwig. I have to give you terribly distressing news. The 5 stars of the firmament may have been stolen. You don't say. Aunt Hedwig remained completely calm. By whom? She even seemed slightly amused. Did she think it was a joke? From Miss Marie, replied Falco in a muffled voice. Marie de Remoulade crept in here as a cook, stole your dress, tricked me into revealing my secret hiding place for the necklace, stole it, and then fled. Bibi and Tina are on her trail, but obviously— The Count shrugged his shoulders resignedly. Without success. He remained silent. He had said what there was to say, without trying to sugarcoat anything. He straightened up, ready to face the storm of retribution that was coming. A painful silence hung in the air as the Count felt his insides churn. Aunt Hedwig suddenly roared with laughter. She even clapped her hands together before wiping away a tear. Bravo, Falco! Now I know what your birthday surprise is. You are performing a play for me. And you, my dear, are a gifted actor. What? The Count raised his eyebrows in confusion. This is by no means a theater play, Aunt Hedwig, but a terrible reality. Oh, Falco! Aunt Hedwig made a throwaway gesture. What is theater and what is reality? You sometimes only recognize at second glance. What are you talking about? The Count shook his head. His aunt didn't seem to understand the seriousness of the situation. Please follow me, he said succinctly. The Count led her and Alexander into the library, where he removed the 7th volume of the family chronicle from the shelf. Then he opened the book. So, what do you see? He asked his aunt. A hollow book, Falco, she replied, unimpressed. The Count explained that until recently, the necklace had been hidden in this book. What a cute secret hiding place, cried Aunt Hedwig amusedly. Ahem. The Count cleared his throat. Cute or not, he said, the necklace is no longer there, which is why I have no choice but to call the police. Aunt Hedwig and Alexander followed him as he marched toward the study. The Count had put Sergeant Quincy's business card on the desk, right next to the old-fashioned black telephone. The Count picked up the receiver and was about to dial Sergeant Quincy's number when the doorbell rang. The Count stopped short. Who can that be? It must be Bibi and Tina, Father, Alex shouted excitedly. As if summoned by Alex's answer, Bibi and Tina stormed into the study only seconds later, together with Marie. The Count lowered the receiver and put it back on the hook. Oh, my word, cried Aunt Hedwig, enraptured. This is the most exciting piece I have ever seen. When on earth did you find the time to rehearse it? The Count paid her no attention. He cast a sinister look at Marie, who had lowered her head guiltily. I'm so sorry, Count, she said softly. Please forgive me. But the Count's gaze remained fixed in a wordless, cold rebuke. Bibi and Tina reported in detail how Marie had voluntarily turned herself in at the station. They explained how and why the theft had occurred and emphasized how much Marie regretted her deed. In short, they did everything to appease the Count, but to no avail. With an unchanged expression, the Count simply asked, Where is the necklace? Marie took off her backpack, rummaged through it, and finally pulled out a small white linen bag. She opened it and let the necklace slide onto her palm. Then she stepped in front of Aunt Hedwig and bowed her head solemnly. Here, I want to give this back to you. Thank you, child, Aunt Hedwig said calmly as she put the necklace on. Well, how do I look? She asked, delighted. Aunt Hedwig, don't you understand that Marie stole the necklace? Cried the Count in annoyance. That she is a thief. He simply couldn't understand Aunt Hedwig's good mood. Of course I understand, replied the old lady. Her face took on a serious expression. I have long since realized that Marie is not telling the truth, and also that there is something wrong with her. Excuse me? The Count blinked in confusion. Bibi, Tina, Alex, and Marie also now stared at Aunt Hedwig in bewilderment. Do you know who King Andre I was? for whom Marie's great-grandfather is said to have cooked, Falco?" she asked her nephew. Without waiting for his answer, she continued. "He was also called André the Posthumous, but he was a child king and lived to be only 5 days old. I just read this in an exciting novel that I took with me on my journey. This king came to mind when Marie talked so pompously about her great-grandfather, and when she confirmed the name, my senses were on high alert." Aunt Hedwig took a break to emphasize her words before she continued. "When we were at Martin's farm and this Sergeant Quincy showed up, Marie was terribly frightened. Only Bibi noticed, but I did too, of course. I was almost certain that Marie had broken into Prince Russell's estate, and that she was also after my necklace was an obvious deduction." "But why didn't you say anything, Aunt Hedwig?" the Count asked, stunned. "Would you have believed me, Falco?" his aunt replied. "Or would you have thought your old auntie was seeing ghosts? Besides, I wanted to find out what drove Marie to such actions. It's normal to do silly things at that age, isn't it?" Count Falco von Falkenstein shook his head. "Such silly things are by no means normal," he said. "I am not willing to accept it with reprieve." He turned to Marie. "Your guilty conscience is not punishment enough." Resolved, he again picked up the phone and began to dial. "I will inform Sergeant Quincy immediately." Marie turned pale. With eyes widened in fear, she watched the dial turn slowly. Bibi, Tina, and Alex were also frozen. The line began ringing. Once, twice, 3 times. Endless seconds passed until a stern voice answered. "Sergeant Quincy, Redwell Police Department." At that moment, Aunt Hedwig stepped up to the desk and pushed down the phone's switch hook. There was a crack in the line, and the Count's call was disconnected. "That's enough now, Falco," she said reproachfully. "Can't you see how you're frightening the poor girl, and all because of a few rocks?" "Rocks!" Falco shouted indignantly. "How can you speak of rocks among the 5 stars of the firmament?" "Because they are," said Aunt Hedwig. "The necklace isn't worth more than a few bananas, or should I say rupees." "What? What are you talking about, Aunt Hedwig?" "Listen, Falco, darling. I'll explain it to you. Afterwards, you can always still call the police if you want, okay?" The Count just nodded as he put the receiver back on the hook. He let himself sink into his desk chair while Aunt Hedwig sat opposite him. Bibi, Tina, Alex, and Marie just sat on the carpet observing Aunt Hedwig's story with great anticipation. And what a story she began telling. "As surely you know, the Maharaja of Kashmir gave the necklace to our Johannes at that time," Aunt Hedwig began. She smiled at the Count in a peculiar way. "Indeed, that is how it was," nodded the Count. "Because Johannes saved the Maharaja's wife's life. In gratitude, the Maharaja gave him the necklace. So it says in the family chronicle." Aunt Hedwig was still smiling. "That's a pretty story, isn't it?" she said. "But in reality, it was quite different." "Different?" The Count raised his eyebrows in doubt. "The Maharaja of Kashmir and the 5 stars of the firmament never existed. Johannes only invented them." "What do you mean, invented them?" repeated the Count again, for he was clearly befuddled. I don't understand." As Aunt Hedwig reported, her great-grandfather, Johannes von Falkenstein, had been a sociable and light-hearted man who loved to entertain an audience with exciting stories from his travels. He didn't take the truth too seriously. When he returned to Falkenstein after a long journey from India, everyone found a necklace that he had brought with him particularly beautiful. Johannes told them a tale about it, the story of the 5 stars of the firmament, the Maharaja of Kashmir, his wife Sita, and the wild tiger he had defeated with his dagger. To his own surprise, everyone believed this adventure. Yes, it was even included in the family chronicle. "But in reality," explained Aunt Hedwig, "Johannes simply bought the necklace for a few rupees at an Indian jewelry market." "At a market?" Falco von Falkenstein could not believe what he was hearing. "How do you know this for certain, Aunt Hedwig?" he asked suspiciously. "From my father," replied Aunt Hedwig. "Johannes once told him in his old age. It is said that he laughed himself to tears." The Count was completely shaken. He would never have thought it possible that his heroic ancestor, Johannes von Falkenstein, had been a braggart and simply invented this story. "A few years ago," Aunt Hedwig continued, "I had the necklace examined by a jeweler, and they confirmed what I already knew, that the stones were not real diamonds at all, but only extremely well-crafted imitations." "Why did you never tell me this?" the Count asked. She smiled. "Why should I have done that? Johannes' story is so amusing. And whether the necklace is real or not, is that so important? In any case, it looks pretty. Aunt Hedwig straightened up and raised her chin so that everyone could admire the necklace that shimmered around her neck. But then she bent forward, took the receiver from the phone and handed it to the Count. Now you may call that Sergeant Quincy, Falco. But Falco von Falkenstein put the receiver back. If the necklace was worthless, then actually, nothing had really happened. It was all just theater. He looked at his aunt helplessly. What should we do now? Well, she said, today is my birthday. The guests will be coming soon, so I suggest that Marie go to the kitchen and prepare dinner. She turned to Marie and said, Would you do that, child? Of course, cried Marie, overjoyed and relieved. She jumped up immediately. I'd love to. And you? Aunt Hedwig looked at Bibi, Alex, and Tina. You all will help her, all right? All right, they chimed in unison. The four friends raced out of the Count's study towards the kitchen. They had no time to lose. After all, they had a 7-course meal to prepare. 2 kisses for Alex. They're coming, cried Tina. She and Bibi stood at the entrance of Martin's farm, while Mrs. Martin and Roger set the coffee table in the garden. 4 riders had appeared on the horizon. Count Falco von Falkenstein, Aunt Hedwig, Alex, and Marie. The birthday party with all the relatives had taken place at Falkenstein Castle the previous day. Bibi had smoothed out Aunt Hedwig's wrinkled dress with a spell, and in order to make a 7-course meal even possible on such short notice, used just a touch of magic when helping out in the kitchen. Much to the delight of his audience, the Count had delivered his birthday speech, narrating with great aplomb the story of the necklace and the tiger without ever mentioning that it wasn't true at all. Most of the relatives had never even heard the tale. Then Ethelbert served up one course after another, presenting a memorable feast that lasted throughout the morning. All the while, the famous 5 stars of the firmament glittered around Aunt Hedwig's neck. The assembled family members were in awe of its many jewels, and nobody would have guessed that the diamonds were not real. This was to remain a Falkenstein family secret for all time, known only by the Count and Aunt Hedwig. Bibi, Tina, Alex, and Marie had also vowed silence. In short, everything had gone well. The celebration had been a complete success. The relatives had bid their farewells in the early morning, and tomorrow Aunt Hedwig would also fly back to Canada. Marie's work at Falkenstein Castle was thus finished. Bibi and Tina did not know what would become of her in the future. In any case, in the afternoon, they all wanted to celebrate Aunt Hedwig one more time at Martin's farm, with coffee and butter cake. This, after all, is what Aunt Hedwig had wished for. The arrivals from Falkenstein Castle came riding into the courtyard. His Highness, the billy goat, bucked random leaps of joy at seeing Marie again, and Hubert the rooster chased the clucking chickens, Bertha and Hannah, across the farm. Soon they were all sitting at the table, which Bibi and Tina had decorated with summer flowers from the meadow. It was not as festive as the day before at the castle, but it was wonderful to sit together in the shade of the lime tree. Aunt Hedwig stood up without warning, clinked a coffee spoon against her cup, and said, I have an announcement to make, my dears. Miss Marie will be accompanying me to Canada. Really? Cried Bibi and Tina. They hadn't expected that, but they certainly knew by now that Aunt Hedwig always had a surprise up her sleeve. Yes, we'll fly out tomorrow, Marie smiled. Aunt Hedwig told everyone that she needed a new cook after firing her old one in Canada. The scrumptious birthday menu convinced her to offer Marie the job. Besides, a little experience abroad wouldn't do a young person any harm. And Marie shared this opinion. This way I can cook and get to know a foreign country on the side. Isn't that great? The Count, who already knew what was going on, offered only a weak smile. But Mrs. Martin, Roger, and especially Bibi and Tina showered Marie with congratulations. A little later, when everyone had eaten plenty of butter cake, Marie gave the 2 friends a subtle gesture. While the others continued talking, the 3 of them got up and strolled to the horse stables as if by chance. Will you show me the hayloft now? Marie asked. I'd like to talk to you about something up there. Although Marie was quite a few years older than Bibi and Tina, the 3 got along quite well. The experiences they had shared in the work in the kitchen had bonded them, almost like Marie was an older sister. The 3 climbed up the ladder to the hayloft and settled in the soft, fragrant straw. It was quiet and pleasantly cool up there. For a while, no one said anything. Bibi broke the pleasurable silence. What did you want to discuss with us, Marie? The young woman sat up and looked at the two friends seriously. "Actually, I just wanted to thank you," she said. "Without you and Aunt Hedwig, I don't know what would have happened to me." She looked directly at Bibi and Tina. "Thank you." The girls both smiled, feeling slightly embarrassed. Bibi looked directly at Marie. "Well, maybe this really was a twist of fate. I mean, you left home to find out what you want to do in the future, and now you sort of know. I guess you just had to take a few detours along the way." "Yeah, some crazy detours," Marie confirmed. "Right now, I'm going to Canada, and later, we'll see. I'll never be a master thief again, that's for sure, but I might be an actress, like my mother." "Well, you certainly have the talent for it," said Tina. "The way you tricked the Count with your Aunt Hedwig act was really quite brilliant. Does your father already know about your plans?" "Of course. I told him first. He said he would visit me when I'm in Canada." Marie didn't say anything for a while. "Remember the first time we talked here in the stables?" she asked. "Sure," nodded Tina. "You wanted to live on a riding farm so badly." "Yes," Marie laughed. "At that time, I simply wanted to do something else. But now I'm glad I can cook, and that I'm going to Canada with Aunt Hedwig. She's the best." "Yes, she is," agreed Bibi. "Will you write us from Canada?" "Sure," laughed Marie, "but only if you write me too." "We will," said Tina. Then she remembered something else. "Is the Count still angry with you?" "Not anymore," said Marie. "Besides, I've taught Ethelbert lots of culinary tricks and dishes to spoil him with in the future, especially for breakfast. And you know what?" "What?" Bibi and Tina asked curiously as Marie pulled a mysterious face. "The Count has anonymously donated money to the animal shelter." "No, the old miser?" Tina laughed, hardly believing it. "Yes," said Marie. "Just to prove to me that one can provide justice without breaking in somewhere." Wow! Bibi and Tina were very impressed. Aunt Hedwig was indeed the best, and the Count was, despite any thoughts to the contrary, not so bad himself. The three let themselves fall backwards into the hay, laying next to each other for a while and enjoying the birdsong coming in through the window. "Tina, where are you?" They suddenly heard Alex call out. He stuck his head inside the barn door. "Are you in there?" The three of them giggled so loudly that Alex couldn't help but hear them. "What are you doing up there?" He stood at the foot of the ladder looking up at them. "Nothing," replied Tina. "We're just having girl talk." "Great," Alex said, a little offended. "You guys are having fun, and I'm sitting out there with the grown-ups. I was looking for you because I have an idea." "What kind of idea?" asked Marie. "I've thought of something we haven't done in ages," Alex said secretively. "And I know exactly what it is," cried Bibi enthusiastically. "A riding competition, right?" "That's right," Alex nodded. The three daydreamers bolted down the ladder. "Did you ask if it was okay if we go now?" Tina asked. "I did," nodded Alex. "My father and your mother allowed it." "Alex, you're amazing," Tina replied and gave her boyfriend a kiss on the cheek. "I think so too," said Marie. "Alex is amazing." With a side glance at Tina, she said, "I hope you don't mind," and also gave Alex a kiss on the other cheek. The young von Falkenstein blushed. "How could I possibly object?" Tina grinned. "And I don't think anyone asked me," Alex feigned a complaint, and everyone laughed out loud. The friends stormed out of the stables to the paddock where the horses were grazing. Once saddled up, they blasted through the gates of Martin's farm, cheering and hollering towards a lovely summer afternoon in the meadows of Falkenstein. The adults looked on admiringly. "Oh yes, it's nice to be young," said Aunt Hedwig. After a short break, she added, "But it's also nice not to be young anymore, sitting in the shade of a lime tree and eating butter cake." At this last remark, Count Falco, Mrs. Martin, and Roger had to laugh out loud. Aunt Hedwig joined in, and the sound of her happiness echoed merrily across Martin's farm as the four young riders slowly approached the horizon.